Marcucci. Father John is a retired priest of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. He periodically celebrates Mass in our parish at St. Athanasius, St. Sebastian, and St. Teresa churches, and at numerous other parishes in the diocese. Prior to retirement, he was the pastor of St. Mary of the Assumption Parish in Glenshaw, which is now part of Our Lady of Perpetual Help Parish. Father John's presentation is titled Personal Transformation Through the Eucharistic Revival. Please give Father John a warm welcome.
Thank you. I came in tonight and picked up a bulletin. And I saw on page 7 this big fascies, as we say in Italian. My goodness, what's going on? It scared me. What's the story? Then, what even made it more difficult, I noticed that the pastor's perspective always has the real Father John's picture, and mine's bigger than his. So those of us who are in the shadow of the real Father John, we now have a little different situation to begin with. Well, anyway, I'm honored to be with you. As I said, 7 years is a long haul, basically. 7 years is as long as I've been retired. I'm 82 years old. The diocese has a regulation that once you're 75, you gotta retire. Now, sometimes the priests will retire and then to become like a senior priest in the parish or help in some way. I live in a little 2-room apartment out in Moon Township, basically, but I help various places. It makes it easier for me to get around to help parishes all over the place, which is easy. I always say the priest and the deacons and the other members of the parish staff, they're the ones that really do all the work. I know that because I lived in a parish rectory for 55 years, basically. And I know exactly what that means, in the middle of the night, someone's knocking on the door. Hey, Father, they left the lights on in the church. What are you going to do? Or, hey, Father, we need more CCD teachers. Hey, Father, we need more money. Hey, it's coming from every, and especially nowadays where they've put the diocese together in terms of, 4 church buildings here, 1 parish, of course, and just trying to get people to understand that we are no longer connected to a building. We're now connected to a parish, which we always was. But because the building and the parish had the same name, it was an easy jump. Now it's a lot more difficult. A lot more difficult to say, these are the 4 buildings we have, but we all belong to the same parish. Some places in the diocese, it's having different. There are 60 parishes in the diocese now. And some of the places are having difficulty because people aren't able to connect with each other in some way. And we lose the sense of the significance of parish for sure. That's probably part of the issue tonight. Anyway, when the refill team called me and said, what topic we want to do? Well, what topic do you want? So we talked about it a little bit, and then we came to the conclusion of maybe because this is the year of the Eucharistic revival, and you're hearing more and more about it, maybe we could just have a little presentation on that and step back for a moment. And as I created with them, the idea is the transformation of the person, the personal transformation through the Eucharistic revival. So that's kind of the basis of the story. Hoping to give you maybe a little bit of the background of the story, and then maybe catch a little of the biblical understanding of the story, and then see how it spills out into our faith, and then how we are transformed by that. Hoping that each one of us can see that in the course of this time we're going to be transformed. Now, it originated back in 2020, 21. They have this Pew research team, and they just take people from the pew and research what they believe. And it struck the bishops of this country that, now these are Catholics, that only 31 to 35% of the Catholics believed in the real presence. Now, the way they were asked questions, and you don't know exactly who they talked to, etc., but that frightened the bishops of the country. The center of our mystery of our faith is the Eucharist, obviously, and people not believing in the real presence. And so that provoked for them to have this renewal. Now you have to keep in mind, we've had renewals in the past. The last national renewal was 1941. It's the year before I was born, basically. But that's the last one. But in 1976, there was an international renewal. It was in Philadelphia. because Philadelphia in the United States was celebrating its bicentennial. And so there was a great one. And I was a priest at that time, and some of my classmates and I. The seminary I went to was in Baltimore, St. Mary's. It's a pontifical seminary, which simply means it has a direct connection with the Pontifical Society of Rome. But guys come from all over the place. You know, Pittsburgh, we had 5 guys in my class that were from Pittsburgh. The class had 92 guys in it because they come from all kind of different dioceses. So I knew priests who had gotten ordained from everywhere. Some of my classmates were from Philadelphia. So when that International Congress for the Eucharist was in Philadelphia, they say, hey, why don't you come in? And so we went and saw some of what was going on there, basically. But that's the last time that a Congress is such, a revival is such. And so the bishops now have decided we need a Eucharistic revival. And so they created sort of like a 3-year program. See, the problem is that most of us probably have not been experienced to what the whole story was because parishes just didn't do it right. The whole idea is in 2022, the diocese was supposed to open up, every diocese in the country, open up the possibility that a revival's coming in 2024. Then in 23, it was supposed to, individual parishes were supposed to remind people about the revival towards the Eucharist. And now in 2024, they're all moving towards Indianapolis in July, where people will come together basically. And it's really well established, and really the team that's working at it at the central basis of the country, they're really setting up very well. They have 4 opening journeys. One journey is going to start in San Francisco. And the whole idea is there are going to be people in each one of these journeys who are going to journey from that place to Indianapolis. So they all will get together in Indianapolis, which is in July 17th to the 21st. So there's a group of people which is going to start next week after Pentecost of this year, and they're going to be coming from San Francisco. There's another group coming from Minnesota, Pyeongchang, Minnesota, basically. There's a group coming from Bronzeville, Texas, and you and I are in the group that's coming from New Haven, Connecticut, basically. And if you just step back for a moment and just get a feel of that. New Haven, Connecticut, of course, you know, is where Yale University is. So you think in terms of the intelligentsia that's represented by those who be coming in that direction. The one in Minnesota is where American native people live. The Native Americans are very popular there. The one in San Francisco is basically people who have a gay sort of lifestyle. And the one in Bronzeville, Texas is where the Hispanic people concentrate. So the whole idea is the Eucharistic revival is for all people, all nations. And so they've designed that there are 6 people and a leader that are going to come all the way from each one of those 4 places. But as they come along those places, they're going to try to pick up other people, at least maybe go with them for a little bit. And of course, you and I would be much more familiar then with the group that's coming from New Haven in Connecticut. They're going from New Haven, they're going to go down to New York City. After New York City, they're going to Philadelphia. After Philadelphia, they're going to Washington, D.C. And after Washington, they're coming to Pittsburgh. So next month, I think it's the 12th to the 19th, they're going to come to Pittsburgh. And there's 8 areas, churches in our diocese that are starting to prepare for that. They're going to start in McKeesport. And then after McKeesport, they're going to come into the city. They're going to go to Brookline and Brentwood. And then they're going to work their way out throughout the city. They're going to go to Midland. The Diocese of Pittsburgh is 6 counties large. And so they're going to go to various places. And every one of those parishes will have something special when they're coming. It's between the 12th and the 19th of June of next month. And the last place they're going to be is Bridgeville. And then finally, the last place is Coraopolis. And from Coraopolis, then they'll move to Ohio, to Steubenville. And go to Steubenville, and then Columbus and Cincinnati, and then eventually to Indianapolis. And so their idea is, as they go to each one of those places, there's some celebrations going on, hoping that each one of those places in this diocese, now visualize, that's happening all across the country. Every diocese is being open to those kind of things. And the idea is that when they come to Pittsburgh, wherever you live, you might be close to it. I was looking to say, if you're living here in Perrysville, probably maybe the closest is Bridgeville or Coriopolis. I don't know. Mount Lebanon, maybe possibly St. Bernard's. But the idea is it gives everyone an opportunity to come and feel like they've been transformed. They're part of a group. Now, some people will pick up the gauntlet and maybe even walk with them. There'll be some people, maybe they'll start in McKeesport and walk with them as they come to Brentwood and Brookline, etc. See, that's the whole idea. And if you just step back for a moment and see the whole geographical area of the United States, that's happening everywhere. There's a whole group of people from all, they're hoping that they can eventually touch over 100,000 people in terms of this journey motif that they're having, basically. And of course, what is fascinating to me, it all ends up in Indianapolis at the Lucas Oil Stadium. Now, anybody that's a Steeler fan knows about the Lucas Oil Stadium, do you not? That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers played the Indianapolis Colts. And most of you who are Steeler fans know, remember back in December of last year, we went out there, we were going to win because we're going to move, and what happened? The Colts beat us, what was it, 30 to 13, something like that. But the Lucas Oil Stadium is where it holds over 75,000 people. So they're hoping, in that July, that they will be able to fill that stadium with people. This is just a side issue because my head goes everywhere. Guess who's coming to the Lucas Oil Stadium to do a presentation? She goes everywhere. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is coming November the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd to the same place. Now here's the bet. The bet is, will the Eucharistic revival have more people at it than the Taylor Swift night? Yeah, it'll be cheaper. Yeah, I've heard that, so I looked up. The cheapest cost for the Taylor Swift is $1,200. But, $1,200, she may feel, she's doing very well around the world. And I just thought it was very interesting that we're going to be there in July, she's going to be there in November. It'd be interesting to compare the stories, basically. But that's the background of the fact that then in July, what happens is, next year, 2025, the motif is opening to the mission of the church. Hoping that so many people have been personally transformed in somewhat of an experience. That does a lot for people when they get together and they realize other people share the same values, and maybe we just meet on this tour somewhere, or we meet people from another parish or from another part of the country, and maybe we're going to, and by the way, you can get a ticket and go to the convention that they're having, the Congress as they call it, in Indianapolis, basically. But that's the dynamic of trying to bring everyone together, and the whole idea is to remind each other the significance of the Eucharist and the importance of the Eucharist and the real life that we have in the Eucharist. Now, one of the things, this is from my own personal opinion, when the bishops realized on that Pew Research thing in 2020, 21, there's a whole lot of Catholics. It's not just, they just were interviewing Catholics. A whole lot of Catholics that do not believe in the real presence. They just think it's a symbol. It's always been, I try to remind people so many times, no matter what issue we are facing in the church today, the church has always faced those issues. Always. Back in the early church, you can see even in John's gospel, there were some people that did not believe that Jesus was divine, that Jesus was in the Eucharist. And a matter of fact, in the first 400 or 500 years of our faith, there were various kind of what you and I would call heresies, basically. The Pelagians, they denied that. The Arians, they denied that. You see, matter of fact, the first ecumenical council, we know Vatican II was the 20th one, the first ecumenical council was held in the year 325 in Nicaea. And the big thing that council defined was that Jesus was divine and present in the Eucharist. Way back when people were denying that. See? So we can't get too nervous about the fact that we're living in a society where people are not really committed to the fact that the Eucharistic presence of Jesus is real for us. And so that's the thought that spawns this Eucharistic revival, basically. And of course, the whole idea is it possible that the Catholic of the United States of America might get transformed by all this is happening throughout the whole country? and especially in terms of those people that might join in some way or another. And that's all I'm suggesting to you. Maybe when you see it's next month in June, the 12th to the 19th, maybe you might, it'll be in the bulletin, I'm sure it'll be in various things. You might go to one of those sessions or something, just to see people from other places and share your faith with them and develop a faith with them. And, the Spirit refuel is the whole idea in terms of developing faith with other people, basically. So that's the background of the story in terms of sort of the history of it, what the Church of the United States is doing, and the Diocese of Pittsburgh, of course, is one of the dioceses that was opened up to receiving this group of travelers. And so you just think in terms of that it's a priest and 6 people at least who are going to start in New Haven and do the whole journey all the way to Indianapolis. So those people will stop at every one of those churches in our diocese, as they will be coming from everywhere. And then they'll all assemble in Indianapolis for those 4 days and have the great session of the Eucharist. Now, as I said, it's been done before, in my lifetime, in 1976, because I remember going to Philadelphia. My classmates who were there and a couple of, about 10 of us, 12 of us, we just met there and, did a couple of the sessions there, basically. But it's an overwhelming experience, basically. Now, the whole thing is, as I shared with Janet when I was talking about this, the idea is we have to have a personal transformation. It's nice to read this in the paper and say, oh, look at all the wonderful things those people are doing, but how does it touch my heart? How do I come to understand more significantly what the Eucharist means to me as I share it with others, as I share it with my God? So let's just start from the point of the biblical narrative, The biblical narrative about the importance of the Eucharist in terms of the presence of Jesus. I think I had suggested to you this once before, but of all the miracles that Jesus did, raising people from the dead, curing the blind, getting rid of demons, there's only one miracle that Jesus did that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. And of course, that miracle is the multiplication of the loaves. So it should strike us. Why is that the only miracle that got recorded in all 4 Gospels? Because, each of the 4 Gospels was sent to a different place. I think we've suggested that to you before we were here. Mark wrote his Gospel, and he took it with Peter to Rome. And so that Gospel is basically for Gentiles, the Gentiles of Rome. They had the Gospel of Mark, basically. Matthew wrote his Gospel for the Jewish people. That's why you notice that Matthew's Gospel has Jesus given 5 speeches. Now, everybody knows the first speech because we call it the Sermon on the Mount. But there's 5 speeches in Matthew's Gospel. Some people don't even realize that. And why would Matthew write 5 speeches? Because he was writing his Gospel to Jews, and the big person in the Jewish faith is Moses, and Moses had 5 books assigned him. We know that. The Pentateuch, from Genesis to Deuteronomy. And so Matthew then creates Jesus as a new Moses, to talk to the Palestinian Jews about how important Jesus is. Luke was writing to the Gentiles of Palestine. And so you notice many times that Luke was a Gentile, trying to get Gentiles who were now being converted to the Christian faith to understand who Jesus was. You see, it's a different community. And then finally, John's Gospel, which is written around the year 90 or 95, those Gospels were written 25 years before that. And so John is trying to include everybody. That's why the image for John's Gospel is the eagle. Because in their mind, the eagle soars into the divine. And John is the one that always accentuates the importance of the divinity of Jesus, especially in the Eucharist, basically. And so John's Gospel was written for Jews, for Samaritans, for Galileans, for Gentiles, saying how significant Jesus is. Okay. So when you have the sense that each one of those Gospels was written to a different group of people, then you come to realize why that story, that miracle of the multiplication of the loaves, isn't the only story that's the same in all 4 Gospels. Because it's setting people up to understand the importance of the Eucharist. No matter where you are, if you're in Rome, or in Palestine, or a Samaritan, or a Jew, you gotta understand the importance of the Eucharist. And so each one of those 4 Gospels tells the story of the multiplication of the loaves, which is the background to understand Jesus in the Eucharist. So just from the point of view of something as simple as that, you realize how significant it is to understand the Eucharist's importance. Now, secondarily, remember, John is the one that accentuates the divinity of Jesus. I don't know if you ever noticed this or not, but if you ever open up your Bible and read the Last Supper story in each of the four Gospels, you'll notice that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus does the bread and wine. Doesn't do that in John. In John's Gospel, there is no Eucharist at the Last Supper. Now, anybody that goes to the celebration on Good Friday, and many do, if you listen carefully, because on Good Friday is when they read the Passion narrative of Jesus, you'll notice there's no Eucharist there. Now, in John's Gospel, Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. He doesn't do that in the other three Gospels. See, that's why we always try to remind people that each one of the four Gospels gives a whole different understanding of Jesus. You just can't say the Gospel. Which one are you speaking? You're speaking of Matthew, you're speaking of Mark, you're speaking of John. Each one of them gives a different understanding of who Jesus is. And you heard me say this before. You know, my parents were from Tuscany, which is Lucca, which is Florence, and everybody goes to Florence to see the great statue of David, 16 feet of Carrara marble, chiseled. And it's the only work of Michelangelo Buonarroti that you can see it from all sides. You know, when you go to see the Pietà or Moses, it's in a niche. You only see it from the one side. And I can still remember as a little kid when my grandparents took me to see that. You know, this is amazing, you know. It's in Accademia where the sunlight's coming down like this. It's being hit from every side. And you see people who are absolutely incredibly know about architecture and things like that. They'll sit there for an hour studying that statue from this end. Then they'll go and they'll study it from this end. And study it from this end. Looking at it from each of the four ends because you get a whole different understanding from each end of that. It's in my head. I was a little kid when that happened, Okay, I go to the seminary when I'm, 22 years old or after college, whatever. Okay, and I hear the professor talk about each one of these gospel writers give us a different vision of Jesus. And that's the first thing that struck my head. So that reminded me of the statue of David. 16 feet of Carrara marble, and you had to look at it from all four angles to really appreciate it. And so we've got to have to realize that. That's why the church in her liturgy allows us to see that. The Catholic liturgy is a 3-year cycle. Now, of course, during Easter season, which we just had, we have John's Gospel. He's not part of the 3-year cycle because we have him every year, and especially during the Easter season and some other sacred times in the year. But you know, once we're done next month, in June, you'll see that we're back to Mark, back to Luke, or back to whichever year it is. Luke, Mark. And John in those special times in the year. Why does the church do that? Because it says to you and me, if you go to the liturgy every Sunday for 3 years, you literally hear the whole Bible. Now we've been doing it since 1975. And many of you have probably been to liturgy in all that time too. So you've gone to liturgy for 25, 35 years. You've heard the Bible 12 or 13 times? Come on. If you had a book and you read the book 12 times, you'd know every character, every idea. If you went to a movie 12 times, see, it doesn't filter to us yet. Oh, we're getting much better at it, for sure. No question about it. Many of you can recall, before the changes were made, we only had 2 readings on Sunday, if you recall. We never read the Hebrew Scriptures. We call it the Old Testament. It doesn't do justice to the Jews, but we now have 3 readings. There's always that Hebrew reading to have, except, in the Easter season. But the whole idea is the church, see, the point is this. That's why most of the time, when you hear about denominational preachers, they're much better than we deacons and priests. No doubt about it. See, because when people go to the denominational church on Sunday, the minister can pick the reading. So the minister can say, I really love the story of the Good Samaritan. I'm going to preach on the Good Samaritan tonight. I love the story of Mary Magdalene. I'm going to preach on Mary Magdalene. We don't have that luxury. I always say to people, if I would ask you to tell me something about a Steelers I would imagine every person in this assembly could say something. Some of you might even remember the numbers of the Steelers back 30 years ago. Some of you remember the Immaculate Reception. You'll say something. But I would say to you, tell me something about the Commanders. The Commanders? Who were they? See, that's the Washington football team. But we don't know anything about that. Some do, of course. But see, if you're able to pick what you want to say, then you can do it much better. Whereas the Catholic priest or the deacon, we don't have that choice. Every Roman Catholic church in the world, if you were here yesterday for Mass, every Roman Catholic church in the world read that story from the Acts of the Apostles about Peter, read the story from the first letter of John about loving, and wrote the story about Jesus' prayer. Everywhere. And so every Catholic priest in the world has to preach on that. And sometimes the stories are easy, sometimes they're difficult. Well, the church says to us, we're not going to let the individual priest or deacon choose the readings. No, because we want you to have the full extent of everything that the Bible has to say. Well, that's the dynamic that the church has. So John's gospel will give us a different understanding of the Eucharist. Why? Because John's gospel doesn't have Holy Communion, as we say, doesn't have the Last Supper meal with bread and wine. Doesn't have that. He has Jesus wash the feet of the disciples. They don't do that in the other three Gospels. But why does he do that? Because John puts all of his theology of the Eucharist back in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the story where they have the multiplication of the loaves, and then the other three Gospels, that's the end of the story, and Jesus moves on. But not in John. In John, all of a sudden, people come to him and say, what are you talking about? Eating flesh and drinking blood. Now you have to keep in mind, for you and me, it's oh-hum. But if you're living in the Roman Empire and someone says there's a group of disciples of Jesus and they gather in that home, now remember, there's no church buildings. There isn't a church building until 300 years later. If you go to Rome, you'll see the first church building we have. So for 300 years, the community of faith either met outside in the field or maybe in someone's home, or down in the, if you've been to Rome, down in the catacombs. That's where they would have the liturgy. And so the Roman Empire is hearing this group of people are coming together in this home, and they're eating flesh and drinking blood. You know who eats flesh and drinks blood? They're cannibals. And cannibal in every society is a no-no. That's why the Roman government was so upset about that. And by the way, which I think is interesting, because when you read John's gospel, he doesn't say, this is my body. He says, this is my flesh. It's a different dynamic, isn't it? Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, unless you drink the blood of the Son of Man, you can't have eternal life in you. See how different that is? It almost is scary, isn't it, in terms of that sense? Well, John's Eucharistic theology about the presence of Jesus is back in chapter 6. Not only does he have the multiplication of the loaves, because that's in all four Gospels, but then, as is typical in John, you see this in John all the time, whether he's meeting the Samaritan woman, whether he's seeing some of the Sadducees, whatever, he'll have an event, whatever it is, Jesus will do, and then it becomes the occasion for Jesus to give a speech. Because that's the high-power theology of John's Gospel. Now remember, John's Gospel was written about the year 90. Jesus has been dead for 60 years or so. So by the time you get to the year 90, the church has developed a theology of Jesus. And what happens is then, in John's gospel, they put that theology in there. And so John then has Jesus say, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can't have life in you. And so the whole dynamic is to see how each of the gospel writers have a great sense of understanding the importance of the realness of Jesus in what you and I call the Eucharist. And by the way, that's why some people didn't believe in it. You see, that's why we talk about now 31% believe in the real presence, maybe whatever that number might be. There's many people that don't. There are Catholics we're talking about. We're not talking about other Christian religions or other people. Catholics, you see. Well, that was always like that. Always that way. One of the great issues that they struck in the early church was the fact that they didn't believe in the real presence. Eat flesh and drink blood. We can't do that. See? a sense to understand, no matter what issue we face in the church today, we've always faced those. That's what's so magnificent about the church. You can throw stuff at it all you want and create all kinds of difficulties around it, but it'll stand and withstand because the Holy Spirit is with us. That's what we're celebrating, by the way, this Sunday, the magnificence of Pentecost. And ultimately, you see that the whole season of Easter is leading us to Pentecost. I'm sure you've noticed that, haven't you? That during the Easter season, did you notice we don't read anything from the Hebrew Scriptures? We just had week 7 yesterday, and then we have Pentecost. Did you notice for these 8 Sundays, we didn't read anything from the book of Genesis or Numbers or Jeremiah? Nothing. The first reading was from the Acts of the Apostles, because that's how the church is spreading after the resurrection of Jesus. And the second reading was all from the letter of John, which is about how we come to love each other. And of course, then the gospel is John's gospel, basically. And of course, if you were here yesterday, you saw very clearly Jesus prayed for the unity of his disciples. By the way, that prayer is the prayer that Jesus gives at the end of the Last Supper in John's gospel. Jesus doesn't pray in the other gospels like that. See, John's gospel has all these speeches. You heard one yesterday. Jesus is now, and by the way, that's the end of chapter 17 in John that we had yesterday. If you open up your Bible and look at chapter 18, that's when he goes and he's in the garden, arrested, crucified, and rises. That's the last thing that Jesus says, what we heard yesterday. I want my disciples to love each other. That's how they become my disciples. I have the love of my Father, and I share that with my disciples, basically. And of course, if you've been following John's gospel all along, you notice that 3 weeks ago, Jesus said, I'm the shepherd, I'm the good shepherd, and you're the sheep. Okay, that's a nice image. You're the guide, you're the leader, and we follow you. Then 2 weeks ago, Jesus said, I'm the vine, and you are the branches. That's a different image. See, John keeps up with the ante. Now, you have to keep in mind, vine and branches, especially those that might be Italian here, it's not the grapes that you grow on trellises. No. Remember, this is a desert, and the sun beats down on it. So think of this. Think of the root of the vine running along the ground, as far away from the sun as you can get. And ultimately, then, that's how you can water it. Now, visualize this. Branches are then coming out from the root. Every Italian, and maybe other people too, my father in Mount Washington, have tomato plants. And you have the tomato plants, and what do? You put a stick there so the plants will grow straight. Think of that in terms of vine and branches. See, I think when we hear that analogy that Jesus uses, that metaphor, we think of a trellis with vines. That's not Palestine. Palestine, the vine was the root along the trunk, the ground, and then the branches growing up from it. See? And they would stick them so that they'd grow and produce the grapes. And so the image is a personal relationship between the vine and the branches. That's different than shepherd and sheep. The sheep and the shepherd aren't of the same ilk. The sheep are just following the shepherd. But when you have vine and branches, they're both of the same ilk. See, that's the next image, which we had 2 weeks ago. Then yesterday, Jesus then says what? He continues that. The way that the Father loves me is how I love you, disciples. And so what is the life that we get as a branch from Jesus? The way he loves us. And so vine and branches have a different dynamic than shepherd and sheep. And of course, it's setting us up for next week. Because ultimately, the Holy Spirit comes now and we become a community of faith. You know, one of the things that's happening, I go around many parishes, I would help, but one of the parishes is having a renovation. And what they've done now is they're renovating their church building. And so for the last there's a couple of months now, I've been there a few times, they have everybody meet in the school hall. Now, it's the same time of the masses, because I've been to them a bunch of times. Same time of the masses, but they're in a school hall with folding chairs. And they're thinking, well, they're getting back to their building because it's going to be renovated and they can't wait to get back into it. Try to suggest, if you can visualize that, that whether you're in that beautiful new renovated building, or whether you're in the old building, or whether you're in the school hall, it's the community celebrating the liturgy that is significant, not the building. Yet we live in a world in which the building becomes more important than the people who are celebrating the liturgy. No one in their right mind would come into a church and start to carve it up. I'm going to carve my initials in this pew. No one would do that. And if you saw someone doing that, you would correct them immediately. And yet how often we hear people carve up each other and think like, oh, let me tell you about that lady that sits in the back row. You know, she never gives anything to the church. Let me tell you about that guy who lives over there in the he never comes and takes somebody else's seat when he comes. We have all kind of ways that we put down other people, and we don't think anything about it. You see, the building becomes more sacred than the people. I suggested, I was just there yesterday, so it made me think of this. I suggested to the group, because I had to have 3 liturgies there, you know, look around. It's the same people that we had a month ago, but you're in this place. And yet it's still Jesus' presence in the Eucharist. It's still the proclamation of the Word. It's still the holiness that you bring. See? Now maybe when you move into this new building, and not some new building, in the renovated church, you keep that in mind. See, that's the problem. Because we say to people, if your Mass is at 10 o'clock, I'm going up to church to worship at Mass. And those friends of yours, or your children or grandchildren, or people who don't ever go to church, will say to you, I don't have to go to church to worship God. I don't have to go to church to pray to God. Of course they don't. Now, we worship and pray to God at church, but if we would be precise as Catholics, I go up to the church to celebrate the Eucharistic presence of Jesus, his dying and rising, in word and in sacrament. When's the last time someone would say to you, you know what, I get up on Sunday morning, go out on the golf course, and I can celebrate the Eucharist of Jesus? See? Once we become precise about what we do as Catholics, we distinguish who we are. Not better than others, of course not. But that's what we do. Well, does it seem possible that because for the last so many years we just say to people, I go to church on Sunday, that eventually people say, I don't believe in the Eucharist. I don't believe in the Eucharist. But if we were to say, I go to 10 o'clock on Sunday or 12, whatever it is, to celebrate the mystery of Jesus dying and rising, wow. Then we have the vibrancy of the Eucharist and what it means. See, part of this whole understanding of the revival that we're having, and by the way, just a point of reference, it's not a reform. We're not reforming the church here. See, people are talking about it's a reform. No. The whole idea is this. Revival implies it's coming from God. Reform implies that we're making it better. And we need to reform things, obviously, or revitalize things. That's on us. But the whole understanding of the background of revival is we're opening our hearts to receive God's presence in how we should more appreciate the Eucharistic presence of his Son. And so the whole church is developing that as an angle and trying to move in that direction. And of course, it is so necessary in so many ways that we see how significant it is for the Eucharist to hold us together and the community of life. And by the way, that's what Jesus said. Huh? That's how we became a disciple of Jesus. My disciples love each other. That's how I can identify with that. You know, I just thought it was so coincidental because I had 4 liturgies yesterday in different churches, and it was Mother's Day. And I thought, what? That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Because what a gospel to proclaim on Mother's Day when Jesus says, my disciples come to love each other as I have love from the Father. I share it like the vine into the branches, and now they come to love each other. And I said I had the kids yesterday too, I said, you know, what happens is it's Mother's Day, and we kind of think about things we're going to give for Mom, which is wonderful. We're taking Mom out to her favorite meal. That's great. You know, we know that Mom wanted a new dress, and we're going to buy that for her. Yeah, that's wonderful. We're going to have this event or that. We're going to get the grandchildren to make little creations to give to grandma. She'll love it. And that's right. It's beautiful. All that is beautiful. And I simply said, if you would say to your mother or to your grandmother or to your godmother or some woman that's part of your life in some way, if you would say, what would you like to have? A meal together, the children making little things for you, or a gift that we give you, or we bring the whole family together and show how they love each other. Because you see, we invited Uncle Harry to come, but he doesn't talk to us anymore. And we had those 3 cousins that we had, and they don't want to come here anymore. And we have a few of our brothers and sisters that don't want to deal with you anymore. So matter of fact, we might have to have 3 parties for your mom because everybody doesn't want to be at the same place. You see? Now, what would mother say? Forget about the gifts. Forget about everything. See if we can get everyone to love each other in our family. That would be the best gift that you could give me. Which I thought was almost ironically scary. That's the gospel that we had on Mother's Day. And so, mother, grandmother, godmother, whoever, you were really representative, symbolic of Jesus yesterday. Because what you feel and what you believe and what really gives you the joy, and see, that's what Jesus said. When my disciples come to love each other, that's the joy of my life. And I bet you every woman you know would say the same thing about if her whole family came together in loving each other, that would be the joy of her life. And so, and as I said, it was almost eerie. It was the same day as the gospel story. But that's the background of the story that now is leading us to Pentecost. See, the whole understanding of the season of Easter is taking us to Pentecost. What's going to happen on Pentecost? The Spirit is going to take the disciples and make them one and send them out to the world. That's you and me. And what gives us the strength out there is the Eucharist. See, I always try to suggest to people, that's why Catholic liturgy has 2 parts to it. We have the liturgy of the Word, and that gives us the challenge. You hear the challenge of the gospel Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. I've got to change my life in some way. I have to transform myself when I hear that gospel. But the challenges of the gospel is so great. I can't live that challenge. But Jesus doesn't abandon us. He says, then come to the Eucharistic table. Receive my body and drink my blood, and you'll have the strength to meet the challenge. And that's how the Eucharist is uniquely attached to the Catholic faith. Many, many other Christians criticize you and me because we don't know the Bible, which is nonsense, absolute nonsense. Because now anyone that's faithful to coming to the liturgy, we hear the Bible every Sunday. And of course, in 3 years, we hear it all. And there's no other denominational church that makes that claim. Their claim is the minister will choose the readings of the day. Now, he or she tries to give a whole variety, of course. But we're planned out. The church planned it out for us. This is how it is to make sure you hear Jeremiah or Genesis or St. Paul or St. John or whatever. In the course of 3 years, you'll hear everyone, the most important parts of the scriptures. And so the sense is that's the dynamic that the church gives us in terms of understanding who Jesus is and how it transforms us because of that Eucharistic presence of the Lord. And so you and I now realize that the church is a little frightened, I guess, these bishops of our country, because it looks like people are losing their appetite for the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Because it's a matter of faith. See, it's our faith that says that. I can't prove to you. I can't even prove to you that Jesus is divine. I can't prove to you that Jesus is resurrected. They're importance of our faith. And once our faith gets watered down, then ultimately we start to lose some of the dynamics of what our faith is. And of course, the classic example is this mystery of the Eucharist. Understanding the dying and rising of Jesus that comes to us when we celebrate the liturgy. And the importance of how we come to receive that. I think it's fascinating. I'm sure that the real Father John didn't have anything to do with my coming here. But you notice last week and this week what his pastoral perspective was? About the revival and the Eucharist. And all the new things that the Eucharistic ministers are going to do, or try to work out something very different, which is interesting because you have a good pastor. Believe me, he's on top of everything. Writing about the Eucharistic importance at a time in which everyone is getting ready in this country for a Eucharistic revival is right on target, no question. But I just thought it was interesting because I took the bulletin here and I saw it had something about the Eucharist and then it has there a continuation of last week. So I guess last week we had the first half of the importance of the Eucharist in the revival, basically. And so, Rashofsky's always on top of it. And you're blessed in that, believe me, because other parishes might not even know what the Eucharistic renewal is about, because sometimes the priests get caught up in their own story and they don't take the leadership from somewhere else or whatever. But that's the sense of it. Okay, so now what's happening? How do I measure my transformation? See, not only are all these things happening out there, these people marching from everywhere, 100,000 people going to be at the Lucas Oil Stadium. That's wonderful. How does it change me? How am I transformed? Well, for my opinion, you got to get into something. You just can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect to be transformed by what's happening in the country. Maybe, and by the way, many things, you can just get on, you can read things in many, many ways, and you can just, plug in, take your computer, plug in Eucharistic Congress, Eucharistic Revival, and it'll give you all kind of stuff, basically like the whole world. As you'll see, well, they really have organized it well throughout the whole country, from my perspective. And the idea is, of course, that Pittsburgh has really jumped into it. Bishop Walterside is sort of overseeing the process in our diocese, but he has all these different people in different parishes really working out something to do that. Now, it just so happened that one of the parishes I help is Coriopolis, St. Joe's. And so knowing that last year as a parish they should be doing something, what they did is every first Saturday of the month, they put a special liturgy in at 8 o'clock in the morning to just get ready for the Eucharistic Congress. And, Father Frank's the pastor. He said, hey, maybe could you take that? Because they're busy, of course. And I said, sure. So I've had it every month. Every month that we have 2 more months to go. And it's the only time it is. It's 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. And people just bring other people to it. Started out 6-7 months ago. There was a handful of people. And I said, so they're trying to bring people to it. And what happened is, I think, although I don't know because I'm not in any parish like that, they became identified as one of the parishes in the diocese that are doing something. So that group of people that are coming from the Seton route, by the way, each one of those 4 routes is named by a saint. And the one that we have is Elizabeth Seton. So it's called the Seton route. That Seton route is going to end up in Pittsburgh at St. Joe's in Coriopolis. And they have some big celebration planned. They're going to have a liturgy, all kind of stuff, which, I'm not stationed there, so I don't know that. And then from there, the group is then going to move to Ohio, basically. And so the suggestion being that maybe people can come to one of those parishes. They're around. They're in McKeesport, and they're in Midland, and up in Newcastle, basic places. And it's the whole schedule. All you got to do is get onto the diocesan webpage, and you can see where they are, what time, what's going on, etc., like that. But it's trying to get people to understand transformation is a personal experience. We can talk all we want and see all the things happening and say, well, that's wonderful what's going on. But if it doesn't touch my heart, then what difference does it make? And so the whole idea is then that we kind of bring that all together and see the significance of that. And the transformation of our lives then allows us to reach out to others. I remember, as I said to you, I went to that international revival in Philadelphia in 1976, and one of the guest speakers was Mother Teresa. Now, I didn't have a ticket. We didn't have tickets. Well, they had a few tickets. But my classmates wouldn't give it to me because I'm not from there. But anyway, so I was just sitting in the back. It was a big auditorium. I was sitting on the floor in the back, and Mother Teresa came and gave a presentation. And then this very, seemed like he was a wealthy person, stood up and he says to Mother Teresa, who was working with AIDS victims and leprosy people and all that, Mother Teresa, how do you do what you do? And without even blinking, she simply says, when I celebrate the Eucharist, I go out and I see Jesus' presence in those who are abandoned. I see the presence of Jesus in them. Now, I think it's fascinating because, in 1997, I think it was, Princess Di died in August of that year. Mother Teresa died 6 days later in September. Two powerful women, two magnificent women. And yet I can remember, because I read this thing about Princess Di, when she was asked why she did what she did. Because she did the same thing. They did the same thing. She worked with the AIDS victims. She gave all kind of help to people with leprosy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when she talked about it, she said, the reason why, because that's why England was so upset about what she did so much social ministry. And they said, what the story is? She said something like this. I'm sort of phrasing here. But she said, I do that for 3 reasons. 1, to show the wealthy people of the world that we can't abandon the poor and the helpless. 2, to let my own country and my own family know that in England we should have a sense of that. And 3, to teach my 2 sons that for the rest of their lives, they should always have an eye for people who are poor or lepers or AIDS or whatever the case may be. Magnificent. Now, both of those women left a great impact on the world. Princess Di would be considered a magnificent humanitarian. She did what she did because she wanted to teach the world what this story was and help people. Mother Teresa did what she did because she saw Jesus in people. See? Same story. They're both doing magnificent things. You can't minimize either one of them. But the intentionality is very different. And that's what understanding the Eucharist in our life is. We celebrate the Eucharist that gives us a different intentionality about the people with whom we come to liturgy. That we are the community of faith. And that we share that in what we do. And therefore, we bring it to the world. As I said, there's 60 parishes in the diocese now. And, some of them, the territory of some is pretty tough. Yours isn't too bad. It's just a little strong maybe if, you're down there in the city of Pittsburgh and Incarnation and Athanasius is out there. And between you and Sebastian's is not too, distance-wise. But it's hard sometimes for people to leave the comfort of their own pew that they've been for 20 years. And I just suggest to people, on a given Sunday, could you sort of wander over to St. Sebastian's and go to the liturgy? On a given Sunday, would you be interested in going down to Incarnation? And I'm not just saying that for the people of Teresa. I would say it to all 4 places. And eventually, some places are doing it now. Some places it's easier because they're much more close to each other. Other places are, down in Greene County, you almost have to pack your lunch to go to the parish, the other half of the parish down there, basically. But the idea is to see, at some point, it's going to come someday. At some point, we're going to have, which we have now, we're going to have 60 parishes. That's what we have. We might have, 122 buildings, but we're going to have 60 parishes. We have 60 parishes. And the idea is, when those parishes come to realize that they are one, they'll understand the importance of the Eucharist. That's part of the transformation process that's hard to do, even for Catholics who come all the time. See, that's what this Pew survey was. They said, we surveyed Catholics who go to church all the time. Well, that's probably the 35% that said we believe in the real presence. But the whole understanding is trying to see how the real presence of Jesus holds us together as one community, Now, you have a great reputation in this area, certainly, and you have a good staff here, and you have a good leadership in John, for sure, basically. But the whole idea is that we're on a roll here, We're kind of building a momentum for the rest of this month and Pentecost. By the way, the week after Pentecost is when those 4 groups are going to start their march or start their walk, or however they come, I don't know. Because, matter of fact, I noticed the one in Pittsburgh, because they were sending me stuff, that when it gets to Washington, they're going to have a boat ride or something, go out on a boat and take a group of people and show the different things of how you celebrate together in different parishes, etc. But it's all coming. It'd be interesting, from my perspective, if you could, be God up here in the heavens or wherever, and look at this country and see all those things next week starting to move from these 4 areas of the world, and seeing that here come Hispanic people, and here come the Native Americans, and here come the gay people, and here come the intelligentsia, and they're all moving, picking up people, talking to people along the way, and eventually coming to Indianapolis to celebrate the Eucharist. And along the way, trying to have an influence on people. It's almost a good symbol, isn't it? It's almost like, isn't that what the church is? Because that's precisely what Jesus said. And so, as you were here yesterday, that's the last words of Jesus, the prayer. I pray, Father, that they are one, as you and I are one, that I live in them as they live in me. I pray for that. I don't know, now that's his last words. I don't know if you ever had the story of that, but when my Italian grandmother was the first to die of those people, and of course they lived on a farm, and we had to take we're cousins, but the grandchildren, we had to take our shift, making sure she didn't die without anybody in the room. So one of my uncles and I just happened to, I was a teenager, but I just happened to be there, and my grandmother died, and she said a few words, but she died, and then she died. And I can still, my uncle who lived there, who was never married, he was in the military, I can still visualize, he was on the chest of my grandmother, trying to beat her chest to bring her back to life. I said, Uncle Joe, leave it be. Okay. The last things that she did and said, you remember the rest of your life. You know that. If you have a friend of yours or a member of your family or a spouse or someone, the last thing that they say to you before they die is something that you hold very sacred. Well, that's how the gospel was yesterday. This is the last thing Jesus says before he dies. See? Love each other in my name, as I have loved you. And the life that I have in that love, I give to you. And of course, that becomes them the image of understanding the right. See, when Jesus says, remain in me as I remain in you, that's the background of the Eucharist. Because when we come up to the Eucharist and we receive the body and blood of Christ, Jesus is within us. And now we are within him. See, that's the magnificence of the real presence. Other religions who talk about it as a symbol, that's why we have a tabernacle. Because after the consecration and everybody has received communion, we just can't take the bread or the wine that might be left over and put it back in the bag. No, that's what other denominations do, because it's just a symbol. But you and I say, oh, no, 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 no. We put that in our tabernacle because it's the real presence of God. So that each time we come here, we know that we are in a direct relationship with our God. The center of the Eucharist is the center of our lives. And therefore, you can see how the bishops of our country were getting nervous when all of a sudden only 35-40% of the people really believe in the real presence. Now, maybe it's higher than that of the Pew survey. Surveys are surveys. But that's what the revival is all about. That you and I can be transformed when we come to the liturgy to realize how significant Jesus in the Eucharist is for us. She said, open up your mind for questions. So my mind is open. What time? I should say what time is it? 8:35. Yes.
I have a convert.
Beautiful.
Way back, Father.
That's good.
Hold on, Jay. I'm coming with the mic so everybody can hear you.
Oh.
Oh, I got to talk out loud.
Yeah.
Father, if I could explain to you in my heart how I just felt, how you explain stuff, I don't know what else to say.